temple. Because I think the Kirtan Academy does every Saturday night, so we'll end class a little early. And then any of you who want to go, we'll have Kirtan from 8 to 8:30. In the temple, well, maybe 8:35. If you like to go.
From 8, exactly.
Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prashaya Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Acharya Sutani Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Pray to the Lord, Shiva Rama Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani. Tiana, is Gopi watching? Because I'm going to talk about what he requested me to talk about.
I don't think so. He's passed out.
He's what?
He's passed out. He's really not feeling well, but I can tell him to.
See if you can unpass him out. De-pass him out. Repass him out. So, Gopi really wanted me to talk about what it was like when I joined the temple I was in. Do you need to speak out loud?
No.
Everybody has? Yes? No? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Yes? No? Maybe? Krishna, Krishna. Yes? It's okay? So, I first went to the temple in October of 1969. In a place called Berkeley, which is near San Francisco, California. And I would go to the temple twice a week for Bhagavad Gita class. So sometimes meet them on campus and chant with them. Harinam. So Prabhupada came in 1965. By this time, I believe there were 17 temples.
17?
17. The temple I was in, maybe 18 devotees. San Francisco temple was about 25. Los Angeles was about 35. Those were big temples. I don't know about New York, but my estimate was maybe there were around 340 devotees living in temples, living in or right near temples in 1969. Just to give you some context. And as far as congregation, basically it didn't exist. There really wasn't, to my recollection, a congregation of more than a few people in each temple. So, my estimation, maybe there were 500 devotees in the whole movement. Interesting, right? And so, the context at that time was that I think our temple president, he had been a devotee maybe 2 years. Temple commander, maybe a year. Ridananda Maharaj, who was Bhakta Howard, and he was giving class, he was giving Bhagavatam class sometimes. So that meant he'd been a devotee. When he started giving Bhagavatam class, he'd been a devotee maybe 6 months. And also significant is nobody understood what the Bhagavatam was. We never read it. So the fact that he could give class meant he was a leading devotee at 6 months. It gives you some context of what a senior devotee is. Maybe 1, 2 years. That's good. Let's speak of 3 years. Very senior. So I'm saying this because we didn't know very much, because there was nobody who knew that much. And as devotees have often said, Srila Prabhupada was the only adult in ISKCON. So not only did we know very little spiritually, we also had limited material experience, and we didn't have any elders. And we didn't listen to our parents because we were rejecting our parents. So there was very little influence. There's no influence from adults. And when I reflect on this, there's two things. We could be a little fanatical and foolish, but at the same time, there was another side to this. And I often say, we didn't know enough to do the wrong thing. Vaishnava Seva, is there anything I could, water or anything I could?
Yes. Wait.
It's like the more you know, then the more you can kind of interpret, maybe I should do this and this is okay. But we knew so little that we were so chaste to anything that Prabhupada said, because we didn't know anything and we only knew what he said. And when you start to know something, then you think, maybe, well, he said this, but maybe he meant that. Or maybe in this context he didn't mean it. So we didn't have that ability. And you might say, well, that was a handicap. But I think in retrospect, in many ways, it saved us. So, trying to think what Gopi wanted me to talk about. I guess he just wanted me to talk about the culture at that time. And my realizations of the culture. Well, one of the things I remember, and you probably also have this experience. When you're a young devotee, everything you learn, you consider that's absolutely exactly the way it's always been and always will be. Because you have no point of reference. It's all new, right? So this is how it is. So you absorb and you follow very easily because you don't know anything. So everything everybody says is like, wow. And so, in that sense, it was very easy for us to do devotional service because when we became devotees, whatever we did was we just assumed this is just what you do. So some days, especially on the weekends, I think we were on the street from 10 in the morning until 9 p.m. We didn't even go back to the temple. And we just did Harinam. And then sometimes, if we went to San Francisco, then we would stay up later till maybe 11 or 12. Thank you. But because we're new devotees, this was just the program and we just did it. So, yeah, like 7, 8 hours chanting on the street, that was just normal. Now, today, if we asked all of you to go out, we're doing Harinam every day from 10 to 6. Okay, I'll go for a half hour, or maybe an hour, maybe 2. Right? You know, there's other things you don't just have to chant. You know, we could think of all these things, and it may be true. But we couldn't think like that. So the whole temple would do Harinam because that's just what we did. I don't think it's not, no, it's not that. It's something else. What? Yeah, that's not the point. I was reflecting on when he was asking me, what I would say. I was reflecting on something that I've talked about before, but it's very interesting. You have a group of devotees in a temple, maybe about 12, maybe like 18 total. And we're responsible for spreading Krishna consciousness in the city. And eventually, in that city, maybe 5 or 6 years later, they bought a big church, so many devotees, Radha Krishna deities, Jagannath, Gaur-Nitai, beautiful temple. So here we are, we don't know much. So how are we able to do that? Can you put your phones on, what? Can't put them on silent? Silence. How do you say silent in Russian? Silence. How?
Тишина.
Sishuda?
Тишина.
Sishuda?
Тишина.
Sishuna.
Тишина.
Tishuna.
Тишина.
Tishuna. Yeah? Well, why are you laughing? You're not from Russia. You just think it's fun. Silencio, por favor. So I was reflecting on this. You have a group of people. They know so little. They know so little about Krishna consciousness. They've never been to India. They have no idea culturally anything about Vaishnavism. Nothing. Zero. Completely. Never. How to play mridanga, how to sing a bhajan, standards of deity worship done in India, all the cultural things. We know absolutely nothing. And you'd think, how could they spread Krishna consciousness? You have to know something. You have to know more than they do. But the answer is, you don't have to. Because I think there were two things that made us successful. Our 100%, 108% faith in Prabhupada, and we would do whatever he said without question, and our sincerity, which when we look back in retrospect, we can say those ingredients were essentially important, because in spite of the lack of knowledge, we could succeed with that. But if we just had knowledge, but we didn't have faith in Prabhupada, or we didn't have sincerity, and only knowledge, I don't think we would have succeeded. There's a story I often tell that's interesting. We were doing, on the weekends we were staying out late on Harinam, like till midnight or 1. It's not uncommon to go to bed at 2 o'clock, get up at 8. So, there's no Mangal Arati. Just get up at 8 and chant your rounds and take breakfast, or maybe take breakfast and then chant your rounds. And there were some problems in the movement at that time. And so Prabhupada wrote a letter and he said, stop going out late at night in Harinam and everyone has to go to Mangal Arati. So right after he said that, I was invited. I was a temple president and I was invited to go to dinner to some Indians' home. And I said, I can't go out at night. My Guru Maharaj prohibited me. He said, well, we're just inviting you for dinner. I said, yeah, I know, but I can't go out at night. So there was no question even thinking what the context was or anything. All we knew is Prabhupada said, don't go out at night, so we didn't. So you might say, oh, you're just stupid. Yeah, that's true. Well, I don't say we're stupid, but we didn't have context. We didn't know enough. But the point was, it was so easy for us to follow because we didn't know how not to follow. Now we know so much, so we know how not to follow. We know enough now that we can rationalize not following with some shloka or some context or some story. Well, once, 1966, Prabhupada said this. It was like the first and last time he said it, and he may have said something to the contrary 100 times. But we could cite that because now we know, we have knowledge. So, And what was interesting about that is that anything that Prabhupada, however Prabhupada wanted to redirect the movement or correct the movement if there was a misunderstanding, it only took 1 or 2 sentences. And that was it. It's like, okay. No GBC meeting, no conference, no seminar on whether it should be this way or that way. And the quotes, it was just, Prabhupada said it and everybody said, okay. It was finished. Like, it's amazing now when I think about how long something's being discussed and how long a controversy would be discussed by Prabhupada. It was usually maximum, from my remembrance, a few sentences or a few paragraphs. And then it was over. Because Prabhupada said it, that's it, faith. So I think it's, we could discuss and say yes, but shouldn't we be more knowledgeable and so forth? But we should be. But Prabhupada also said that you can err on the other side of being over-intelligent. By over-intelligent he meant you know so much that you know enough to disobey your guru. You can use we heard something today. That was so funny. I was in a very controversial, you could say controversial workshop today about the role of women. Well, it got quite heated at the end of the class. You may want to go, it's interesting. But the facilitator quoted a very funny statement by Hridayanath Maharaj. He said, sometimes we use Prabhupada's quotes. I have to read this. This is like, only Hridayanath Maharaj could say this. I like reading other people's quotes because if you don't agree, you can argue with them. I didn't bring my bag today. You can't use Srila Prabhupada to argue against Srila Prabhupada. That's classic Hridayanath Maharaj.
So how do we know that someone is doing it?
Well, we'll get there. We're still in 1970. We haven't got to 2020 yet. So, the good thing is we didn't have the capability to not have full faith in Prabhupada because we were so ignorant and we were so young in Krishna consciousness. So when Prabhupada said something or wanted something, everybody took it extremely seriously. This is what he wanted, so we just do it. And it was, the interesting thing about it is when you have that level of faith, even though it wasn't mature faith, but it was still very strong, it's very easy to do things. Because your guru says, do it, and you go, okay. Like I was a devotee for 8 months, and I had just turned 20, and they made me temple president. So, yeah, if you were asked to be temple president now, after joining 8 months at the age of 20, you'd have a whole list of excuses, right? And reasons and shlokas and stories. But in that era, it was like, okay, that was basically, we need you to be the temple president, and you're going in 3 days. Okay. We took it, that's what Prabhupada wanted, and so because we took it that way, we could actually do it. And that wasn't so difficult, but I had godbrothers who were sent to other countries, even at 6 months in the movement. From America to Australia, from America to Germany, France, like that. Okay. And you know the story when Prabhupada was traveling to Amritsar, and when they stopped in Delhi, a man asked him, why don't you start a temple in Delhi? And Prabhupada said, that's a great idea. So he had a group of devotees, I don't know, 10 or 20, and he asked 5 of them to get off the train and start a temple. Okay. I thought we were going to Amritsar. No, but he said, but Prabhupada, we're supposed to go to Amritsar, and maybe after Amritsar we come back and decide who should open the temple and have a meeting. It wasn't like that. It was just, okay, you. So that faith in Prabhupada's words, his vision, his knowledge, was and the lack of faith in our vision, knowledge, maturity made it very easy. Prabhupada said it, we would do it. And then coupled with that was what I would say, it seemed to me, this very deep level of sincerity that we have found the absolute truth and we want to perfect our lives. And whatever our Guru Maharaj says, we sincerely execute it for his pleasure. So you have these two things. Well, you could say three things: the faith, the sincerity, and the ignorance. But the ignorance didn't matter because we had enough knowledge. And Prabhupada said, if I know more than you, I'm your guru. The definition of guru is someone who knows more than you, he's your guru. So in that way we were the guru for all the hippies in Berkeley because we knew more than they did. Then I was reflecting on some other things I think that Gopi Jivana wanted to understand, which was what was the culture at that time. And when I was reflecting on it, it's an interesting question because anytime you discuss culture, the natural question is that the culture that Prabhupada instituted, or was it a combination of what he instituted and us as hippies and us as Americans? Or was it exactly the way Prabhupada wanted? And so that's why it's interesting to discuss it, because it doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly how Prabhupada wanted. So I just wanted to say that before I say anything. But it was interesting. What I find interesting, and I don't want to make a social comment on it, but I just want to describe it, and you can also think of it. What I find interesting is that there were a lot of things that were happening that we had no preconceived notions as this being right or wrong. And those notions came later when, rightly or wrongly, people told us this is right and this is wrong. So I remember in those days the relationship we had in the temple. I think there were like 12 of us living in the temple, or 13, and then a few near the temple. And you probably heard this, it was like a family. Temple president and his wife were like the mother and father, and everyone else was like brothers and sisters. And so it was very informal. It was a small temple. You're basically on top of one another. One room for men, one room for women, I think. Temple president had a room, and there was a prasadam room and a temple room. And the prasadam room was like the general room. And that's like when we were not in the temple, at the temple program, the prasadam room was like where everybody was. That's kind of where the living room, the lounge of the family. And so there was respect for seniority, but at the same time, because it was like family, there wasn't so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Not etiquette, what's the word I'm looking for?
Informal.
Formality. There wasn't so much formality. It was between the bhaktas and the temple president, between the man and the woman. I never felt it was unhealthy. It was kind of a close-knit family. So in those days, there wasn't much of a stigma, male-female stigma. It was, obviously there were restrictions, but the restrictions were not as strong as they were later. So when we have kirtan, there wasn't a men's side and a women's side. When we took prasadam, there wasn't a men's side and a women's side. And nobody even thought of a men's side and women's side, because that's not part of our culture, right? That's not how we grew up, right? When you're in school and you have lunch and there's some boys and girls. So we just go on like that. Then there wasn't really a problem that I remember. And we go on Harinam, it was the same thing. There wasn't a men's side and a women's side. And I never thought, I don't remember anyone thinking that that's a problem. So it was very, like brother and sister kind of thing. But what I find interesting was, at least where I lived, around 1972, Prabhupada had made a few men sannyasis. Before that, there were a few, but a lot of them left America. So around 1972, devotees had gone to India, 72, 73, they'd seen Indian culture, and there were more sannyasis. And so, what do sannyasis preach? So we're all one family, love your brothers, love your sisters. Not exactly. Woman is Maya, keep her away, women here, men there. So, I once heard a lecture by a Mayavadi. I was with my godbrother, and this big Mayavadi was speaking, and he said, I have to take you to listen to this guy. This guy is super popular. And he was talking about mind control, and he said, the Guru told his disciple, in the morning, when you take a bath, don't think of a broom. And the disciple says, I never think of a broom. What to speak of when I take a bath. So, next morning, it's time for the bath. What do you think the disciple's thinking of? My guru told me not to think of a broom. Now he's thinking of a broom. So, he was making the point that what you try to avoid or you're adverse to, then you become. So it seemed for us as brahmacharis that preaching that woman is Maya and so forth was like that. Don't think of the broom. Now everybody's thinking of the broom. We weren't thinking of the broom before until we were told you shouldn't think of the broom. So the mood prior to that time was interesting because we didn't know that the restrictions should be very, very as serious as they became. We didn't know that, and it's like you don't know something's bad until someone tells you it's bad, and all of a sudden, ooh, this is bad. So it was. Going back to the faith we had, just to give you an example of faith. One, I had been coming since October, and then by November I decided I wanted to be a devotee, and so I was in university, so I finished that semester in December, and then I went back and told my parents, and then I decided, I grew up in LA, but I decided I would join in Berkeley, I just thought it would be easier and better. So I went back in January, and this is amazing. So I think I moved in the temple like second or third week of January, and then Prabhupada had been in Los Angeles. He had come in December, and I had seen him. When I went back to Los Angeles, I had seen him. He'd come maybe the third week of December, second or third week. So he'd stayed, he was still there. So one day they called him in the office, and they said, you're going to go to Los Angeles to get initiated by Prabhupada. Okay. I didn't ask. I didn't know what initiation exactly was. So we were so surrendered to the process and the guidance of our seniors that all they had to say is, you're going to Los Angeles to get initiated. Okay, whatever. And to us, it was like anything. We need you to wash the dishes. we need you to clean the floor. And after you finish cleaning the floor, you're going to go to Los Angeles, get initiated. And then it was like that. It was like, okay. We took like that, we had given ourselves to this process, and so whatever we were asked to do, and we would just do it. And but one thing I think that, you're all here in Mayapur, especially most of you were here on Nityananda's appearance day, and the energy was very high, wasn't it? Very high on Nityananda's appearance day. So, that's what it was like in those days. It was like the energy was very high. And then when we would see Prabhupada, the energy was really high. And it was almost like, I would say, if I look back on it, I almost say it was like a dream. Like, sometimes people's things are so good, you say, I pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. So it's like this is unbelievable. That we have the absolute truth. Here's a pure devotee, and it's right in our own country, and it's completely ecstatic what we're getting. And so the energy was so high, the happiness so intense, that it was like every day was like, wow, this is like, I can't believe this is actually happening. So, people often say, especially now, they ask, well, did you ever doubt? Did you ever doubt it? And I think one thing for us, the fortune we had, I mean, not that you can't have this fortune, but maybe took less effort for us. There was a level of Krishna consciousness in Prabhupada's presence that was so deep and so tangible, like we say, you could cut it with a knife. The experience was so intense in a good way and so deep that if you didn't have faith, it was like something was wrong with you. Like, how could you not have faith having that experience? And sometimes when I look back at it, I think it felt, you could ask other Prabhupada disciples, it felt like Prabhupada was endowing us with that experience, like he could give us that experience. He could say, okay, I'm going to shower ecstasy on you in this kirtan, or I'm going to shower realization on you in this Bhagavatam class. And this one devotee told a story. So there was a kirtan, Prabhupada wasn't leading, but in the middle of the kirtan, Prabhupada took over. And he said the kirtan was like no other kirtan he'd ever experienced in his life. And when the kirtan was over, and Prabhupada was reciting the Premadhvani prayers, he was crying, and he couldn't stop crying out of happiness. And he looked around, and everyone in the temple was crying. So it was like Prabhupada said, okay, we're just going to open up the floodgates of ecstasy, and you're going to experience something which you're entirely unqualified to experience, but we're going to give it to you. We're going to give it to you. So I felt that a lot in Prabhupada's presence. Like he was giving us what we were not entitled to in ecstasy and realization. And like we all knew it. And we were taking that and we were going out and we were sharing that. We were sharing that ecstasy. I had another amazing experience. Very, very interesting. It's interesting for me to reflect on this because I'm reflecting on something that happened 50 years ago and I remember it like it was yesterday because it was such a heavy experience. So, here's the context. I'm 19. I'd maybe been living away from my parents for maybe a year. maybe, I don't know. No, yeah, probably about a year, at least 8 months or something. I've been living away from them, not a long time, and we had a fairly good relationship. I mean, we had a great relationship until I became a hippie. And it was like, naturally, I didn't like everything I was doing, but still, it was a good relationship, and they were good parents. So it was very close, and there was nothing they ever did that would ever upset me. I didn't have anything on my parents, this and that. And so, if I think of my parents, I think nice mother, nice father. My mother would go to one store and she'd buy peaches because they had the best peaches, and she'd go to another store, she'd buy the plums because they had the best plums, and she'd go to the bakery because they had the best bread. Like, totally spoiled me rotten. And my father provided well, anything I needed he would give me his time. So the relationship was good. So I had decided to become a devotee after being with the devotees for 10 weeks. And then when the semester ended, it was Christmas, and so I went back to tell them I was going to become a devotee. And they were completely devastated. It was like the worst thing I've ever told them. I could have told them I was a drug addict. There's a cartoon like that where it shows that the kid becomes a devotee, and the parents say, "Well, couldn't you just become a drug addict?" I'm serious. If I were a drug addict, at least there's hope for rehabilitation. It totally devastated. Like, my mother was like no, she didn't want to practically live after that. She could hardly look at me. And I was married like I was 20. I think I got married when I was 21. I had a son when I was 23. She never touched him. She didn't want to look at him. It was the most traumatic experience of her life. And I remember to this day exactly where I was standing in the bedroom and exactly what I said. I told them, this is what I'm going to do. My father's saying, well, why can't you just go to school and just do this and go to school? I said, no, I can't. I'll fall into mine. I won't be able to do it. And my mother was like, she didn't say anything. She couldn't say anything. And they're totally, here's your parents, this is a pretty close relationship, and they're good parents. Totally devastated. And you know what I was thinking? This is really difficult scene, like heavy. To make a good scene for a movie. And you know what I was thinking? I was thinking, if I don't do this now, this exact same scene is going to happen in my next life. Because I'm going to have a mother and a father in my next life. I'm going to come to Krishna consciousness, and I'm going to have to tell them that I'm becoming a devotee, and they're both going to have a nervous breakdown. So I might as well just do it now. And emotionally, I was just like, no, this is what I'm doing. And you might say, Mahatma Prabhu, you are such a fanatic, insensitive, not compassionate, unsympathetic. And I will say, yeah, probably you're right. But I also think that Prabhupada was coming to spread Krishna consciousness, and he was picking up his soldiers, and it was like, he gave me the ability to just say to my parents, this is what I'm going to do. They completely had a breakdown. And I just walk out of the room and get on the next bus and go to Berkeley and move in the temple. And no problem. So I think, at least my realization is Prabhupada was empowering us to do what we had to do, because he needed all of us to spread Krishna consciousness, because, as he often said, he couldn't do it without us. So he was giving us Shakti that we didn't earn. It was beyond our adhikari, our qualification. We couldn't have that deep realization so easily, but he was giving it to us as a gift, so that although we were very new, we could act on a platform as if we were been devotees practically our whole life. That's my experience. And if you have the opportunity to watch old video footage, early days in the movement, and you look at it from this context and look at the devotees, it doesn't look like they're new devotees. Like if I told you, here's the Bhakti program. The Bhakti program is installing deities. Like there's a deity installation of Rukmini Dwarkadish in Los Angeles. And everyone in the temple is like maximum 2 years, 1 year, 6 months. But they don't look like it. They look like they've been devotees all their life and they're doing everything, chanting the mantras and doing the puja. They don't at all look like new devotees in the way they're chanting. So, from my perception, Prabhupada was endowing us with special Shakti. And we were fully receiving it and employing it, and it was having its effect. And you'll hear stories, or maybe you can read, of how devotees were preaching then. They're like amazingly good preachers. They've been devotees 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. It's like they were Prabhupada's mouthpiece. It was like you could hear Prabhupada or you could hear them. You've got the same thing. And so there was such a connection with Prabhupada as Acharya, and we wanted to be like him so much. Because for us, he was the ideal human being, and if we could be any way like him, we would be like him. So much so that some devotees took it to such an extent they would start speaking like Prabhupada. Making any grammatical mistake or mispronunciation in Prabhupada, they would do that. It's just, that's a little excessive. But he had such a strong influence on us, more than anyone in our lives, that we just wanted to emulate him. We'd dress like him, talk like him, preach like him. So I think there's a lot to be said about that level of faith and that level of empowerment. And so even you're not very advanced, but you can get empowered and do amazing things. So now let's look at this in context. Let's go back to 1970. ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness, was being run by 21-year-olds, basically, who have been devotees on average 1 year. Okay, so I'm going to give you 50 21-year-olds who joined last year and say, go spread it around the world. Oh, so many problems, and I have to travel. I got to preach to everybody all the time. I'm on the phone. And Prabhupada, by his potency, kind of just took us from 1 year devotees to lifelong devotees in this sense, in dedication, from the point of view of dedication. Then, these 22-year-olds who had been devotees for 2 years are being made sannyasis. How do you do that? How do you make someone a sannyasi? You have to give them some power. You might say, well, sannyasis fell down. Yeah, that's true. Some of them did. But before they fell down, they did amazing service and amazing levels of renunciation. The other thing, we can take some questions. We're going to have to stop around 7:45, because we're going to go to the temple for kirtan. You're all invited. Saturday night kirtan. But the last thing I want to say, what also contributed to this, and this is significant, especially you're here in Mayapur, you have a chance to participate in lots of kirtan. Because kirtan's going on 24 hours in Prabhupada's hut. So many kirtans in the temple. Every devotee, except maybe 1 or 2, in the temple was on Harinam Sankirtan every day from 10 to 1, then lunch, and then go back out till 6 o'clock. And then 3 days a week, we would, I think, have class, and then we'd go back out again in the evening for an hour and a half. So every devotee was doing at least 6 to 8 hours of kirtan, 6 days a week. And that gave us tremendous amounts of spiritual strength. And just in retrospect, I think that was one of the reasons our movement was able to grow so quickly. It was like, you're growing a little seed, and if you use cow dung, it's a super fertilizer. I don't know if you have experience with it. Like even with growing tulsi, and use cow dung, it's like amazing. So that Sankirtan, it was like cow dung for our Krishna consciousness. It was doing it every day. The atmosphere in the temple was very pure because everyone in the temple was chanting 6, 8, 9 hours a day. You could imagine, right? So I think that was very important part in the formation of the Hare Krishna movement, that all the devotees were doing kirtan. Because we weren't that Krishna conscious, but you can't not be Krishna. It's hard not to be Krishna conscious if you're doing kirtan all day. It's hard to fall into Maya if you're chanting Hare Krishna all day. And that's what we're doing. And I just remember that even though I was a very young devotee, doing that kirtan all day, it just kept me in Krishna consciousness. You're praying all day for purity. So we'll take some questions. We have about... that clock is fast. Oh yeah, so we have time.
What about
Yes.
what I asked of you? About the statement